My name is Mustafa, and 6 years ago I started a small company called DeepMind Technologies with a couple of my friends. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about our company, why we started it, the purpose behind our mission, and some of the interesting applications that we've been working on, particularly this year. So our mission is to solve intelligence. The underlying assumption behind our mission is that over the last couple 100,000 years, we've created this incredible tool that sits on our shoulders, our brains, an incredible tool for solving very complex and very tough problems. Everything around us, our culture, our music, all the progress that we see is somehow a product of our own human intelligence, our ability to distill lots of very complex inputs, process them, and reproduce them in a really interesting way to create all of the things around us. So in some sense, if we're able to distill the essence of what makes us smart as humans, potentially we could use that to help us solve some of our toughest social problems. And that's the second part of our mission. The purpose behind our objective to solve intelligence is to try to use it to make the world a better place. And so one interesting place to start, I think, is to try to look at what's at stake in the world today. What really matters? What's happening in our world today? Well, no better place to start than looking at how clean water is distributed across our planet. 800 million people don't have access to clean water today. And incredibly, it looks like this is set to double over the next decade. So despite all the incredible progress that we've managed to deliver, some of the most fundamental elements of a civilized existence are inaccessible to 1 in 6 people in our world. 800 million people are malnourished, and yet a third of the food that we produce every year is wasted. And so what is it about the mechanism that we're using for production and for distribution that means that an incredible number of people don't have enough, and yet an incredible number of people have far too much and more that they need? It's been estimated that it would take something like 3.1 planets worth of resources to support everybody in the world at UK levels of consumption. So we live an incredible existence and we benefit from progress in a tremendous way. But how does that scale to a rising middle class in China and Brazil and India and the rest of our global population over the next 30 to 50 years? Inequality is an enormous problem. The incomes of the top 1% have risen 300% in the last 3 decades. And yet the bottom 2/3 of our global population have seen their incomes fall. An incredible disparity, an incredible tough problem that we are trying to solve. So I think, in essence, what we're really trying to do is increase our collective and general problem-solving capacity. How can we make sense of all the data that we're creating that describes our human systems around us and use it to make much better predictions and much better interventions in a timely way to make the world a better place? That's what drives us and motivates us at DeepMind. That's our core purpose. And we like to think of ourselves as a hybrid organization, taking the very best from academia with its focus on long-term, very hard research questions that are maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years out, and combining that with the kind of pace and the scale and the agility of a big company and the resources of a big company and the energy and momentum that you get in a startup, whilst all the while underpinned by a social mission. The very best people in the world today want to work on meaningful problems that actually make the world a better place. Compensation is a small part of the equation these days. The very best people can go work in any company, in any sector, but what really motivates them and what really gets them to get out of bed in the morning is a purposeful and meaningful mission. One of the things that we spent the last couple of years working on is building general purpose learning agents. We like to train agents end-to-end from scratch to perform well in a wide range of environments. That's kind of like how humans do a good job of learning. So we know how to ride a bicycle, and that helps us when we come to balance on a motorbike. We learn how to play chess, and some of the strategic instincts that we can glean from that environment help us potentially in business or in other environments. We're able to generalize from one problem to another, and that transfer learning capacity is absolutely critical. So before we were acquired by Google a couple of years back, we worked very hard on the old school Atari testbed. So this is 100 or so of the Atari games from the 80s and 90s. The objective here was to train an agent in a very raw environment. So all the agent was given was frame by frame the pixels that it sees when it's sort of in front of an Atari screen. It's wired up to the action buttons, but it's not told what any of these things do. So it has to learn through interaction with the environment and through exploration what is rewarding and what is useful. All of the knowledge that it eventually accrues in order to perform well in these kinds of environments is learned completely from scratch. So unlike many traditional approaches to artificial intelligence, where the rules of the system, essentially the intelligence of the system, is handcrafted by intelligent humans, by the designers themselves, in our situation, all of the knowledge is extracted through direct interaction with the environment, through self-play. And so the only incentive that the algorithm is given is score. And it uses score to learn to play all of the games. So really imagine a robot in an arcade watching the screen and simply controlling a joystick. And actually, it's pretty remarkable. So our agent was able to learn some pretty cool strategies and importantly play over 60 of the games to human, or in many cases, superhuman standard, simply by being given a game to interact with and a score and control of the actions. So this gives you a feel for the kinds of environments that our agent is performing well in. So this is a 3D racing environment. This is more of a 2D God view where it's got to shoot the objects and get up the river as fast as possible. This is a three-dimensional tank game where it's controlling the tank. This is a more adversarial game where it's playing the inbuilt AI and obviously crushing it 22-0. This is Sequest, where it has to collect divers and go up to the top to get oxygen. This is boxing, again, a more adversarial game. So all sorts of interesting physics and motion and objectives. It doesn't know anything about the idea of boxing or the idea of cornering your opponent, but it learns that strategy through interacting with the game, which is super interesting. It shows that we can actually learn increasingly complex behaviors from very, very simple self-play interactions. And we were lucky enough last year to get a Nature paper for this and win a front cover. And so for a research organization, as many of you will know, this is the holy grail of things that we're excited by. We extended this work earlier this year to learning to play the classic game of Go. Go is an incredible game. There are two colors of pieces in the game. There's black and white pieces, and the objective is to conquer territory by surrounding your opponent. And the really interesting thing is that on a 19 by 19 board, there are actually something like 10 to the power of 170 possible board positions. So this is an incredibly large number, a 10 with 170 zeros on the end of it. That's the number of possible configurations if you roll out all possible game board positions in a game. And most spectacularly, one way to kind of get an intuition for how big this number is that there are more possible board positions in the game of Go than there are atoms in the known universe. So in every liquid, solid, and gas all around us in the known universe, there are many, many, many more board positions. So traditional techniques where you write a rule that says, like in chess, for example, if you have your knight on the outside, on the rim, then it can only do half of the actions that it could otherwise do if it were in the center. Complex rules like that. They don't work because there's no structure in the game that humans can easily craft rules for. And actually, that's quite similar to many of the big challenges that we face in the world today, from climate change to managing healthcare systems. And this is the kind of sense of the branching factor that you get from the game of chess. So the chess, there are about 10 to the 45, 10 with a 45 zeros on the end of it, possible board positions. But to give you an intuition for how large the game of Go is, this is more like the number of possible board positions. And this branching factor will go on for 200 or so from any given move at the starting board position. So it's an incredibly large and incredibly unstructured space that needed a very different set of methods in order for us to make progress. So we trained two neural networks to solve Go. The first was a policy network, which very quickly looks over the existing board position and tries to identify the top possible moves that are most likely. So in this case, the 10 green blocks that you see are the most likely moves that the algorithm thinks are going to be rewarding. And once it's made a decision and stack ranked them 1 to 10, it picks one of them to search much more deeply and roll out using methods like reinforcement learning to see which ones are likely to be more valuable and then select those to pick the optimum move against its opponent. We spent about 6 months working on this, and then back in March earlier this year, we took AlphaGo to Korea and played Lee Sedol. one of the greatest living legends of the game. He's won 18 world titles and is basically the greatest player of the last decade. And we played him in a live match over 5 days, and we were lucky enough to be able to beat the world champion 4-1. Most importantly, we were also awarded a Nature paper for this and managed to get the front cover again, so the team were doubly happy. But what we're ultimately motivated by is taking a lot of these techniques and trying to apply them in the real world to make progress with some of our most intractable problems. And of course, there's none more intractable and more pressing than the challenge we face with our global climate change. Temperatures are rising, and we've made incredible progress at Paris, but that shouldn't make us complacent, and we have an enormous amount of work to do to avoid this impending inflection point that we now face. In fact, energy consumption is the largest contributor to carbon emissions globally. And that's why one of the things we were very keen to work on earlier this year is data centers. Data centers actually consume about 3% of global energy annually. And so what we did is, obviously having access to one of the largest computer infrastructures in the world at Google, is to train a model that looked at all of the past sensor data for how that infrastructure behaved over a 5-year period, and try to build a model of how that infrastructure behaved, temperature, air pressure, fan speeds, clock speeds, and marry that to the incoming demand. So whenever you write a query into YouTube or into search, we can model that demand and predict it over time, and then optimally try to match those two things in order to adjust the cooling load required to reduce the temperature in the data centers in real time. And incredibly, we were able to actually reduce the power used for cooling by a whopping 40%. So we're able to deliver exactly the same performance. There was no flicker in your YouTube videos, and we were able to do that with 40% less energy required for cooling. So here's a graph of power usage efficiency overall in the data center, and you can see where we turn on our machine learning control system, and when we turn it back off again, the cooling energy required spikes. And so this was very exciting to us. What we're now thinking about is how we can extend this more broadly to the national grid and to other large-scale pieces of infrastructure, which essentially have the same characteristic. All of our algorithms that we develop are inherently general, and so given some data set, we should be able to train an algorithm based on some inputs, develop a model, predict some outputs, and then provided we have access to controls, we should be able to deliver similar sorts of performance. So we're very excited about the potential here. Another objective that we've had from the outset of starting the company is to launch DeepMind Health. And so earlier this year in February, we launched a new division of DeepMind, DeepMind Health, to work closely with the NHS. One of the big challenges in the NHS is that there's an incredible amount of data that's being captured all of the time. The downside is that most of that data is on paper and sits at the end of your bed, so only a single clinician is consulting it. And they actually have to remember, I need to examine this data, go to the end of the bed and look at it. So they need to pull that data towards them. Whereas every day, you and I on our phones are on the receiving ends of pushes of data. And so when the system, whether it's a notification or a reminder for your text messages or for your photos or Facebook feed, is pushing you information, which is very different to the way that information is stored and processed in the hospital, largely on paper, largely inaccessible. And in fact, when a bunch of academics get together to figure out how to improve the system, typically what their output is a patient safety alert. So they would have spent 5 years or so doing a bunch of studies, reviewing as much of the data that they can get access to, and then determining that actually a whole series of interventions need to take place. But the way they affect that change is simply to post a PDF on email to all of the doctors and nurses in a hospital, put up a poster, and so on and so forth. So there's no real tangible understanding of how that's actually affecting change in the system. There's no feedback loop. So one of the things that we put a lot of effort into focusing on was acute kidney injury. And acute kidney injury for the NHS is a massive problem. Contributes to about 40,000 deaths per year. And it's estimated that about a quarter of those are entirely preventable. So if we get in there at the right time with an early intervention, we can actually prevent many of these deaths. And of course, this costs the system about £1 billion or so a year. And there's a bunch of other similar pathologies. Take sepsis, for example, a national priority. Septic shock actually has a 50% morbidity rate and contributes to 35,000 deaths a year. over a third of which are estimated to be preventable. So there's all these sorts of conditions that actually require real-time access to the digital data with control of the intervention that we can actually use to get in there quicker and earlier. This is all about getting access to the right data, deploying the right intervention at the right time. So one of the tools that we've built is an intelligent alerting platform called Streams, where we digitize all of the data, put it on a personal mobile device in the most secure way possible to all of the nurses and doctors in the system, and enable them to access that data whenever they want to, and also be on the receiving end of alerts and notifications and reminders that help them to move around the hospital to patients of most need in the most efficient way. Another project that we're very excited about is with the Moorfields Eye Hospital. We've been collaborating with them to do better early detection of blinding eye diseases. So the GIF I show you here is a OCT scan, optimal coherence tomography. It's a 3D scan of your eye, which tells you where there may be underlying pathologies, macular edemas, and age-related macular degeneration, and so on. And this is really important because 1 in 4 people in this country are actually obese. And when you are obese, you're 40 times more likely to get some kind of diabetes. And if you do have diabetes, you're 25 times more likely to suffer some kind of sight loss. So the number of people who are at risk of sight loss is growing massively in this country, and it's kind of a hidden problem that is getting worse and worse. But the remarkable thing is, if you get in there early, with an early detection and an early intervention, then 98% of the most severe types of sight loss can actually be prevented. Very consistent with what we've heard earlier from Peter and Jimmy about the importance of real-time monitoring of the data in order to detect the oncoming condition early and intervene as quickly as possible. It's really quite remarkable. We're also working on using some of our machine learning and AI algorithms to read CT scans in order to improve the way that we deliver radiotherapy cancer treatment. So 40% of cancer patients actually receive some kind of targeted radiotherapy. But in order to plan this treatment and prepare for the radiotherapy, a human has to actually sit down and label all of the voxels or all of the pixels that you see on the screen there manually, by hand, in order to deliberately target the areas of interest and concern and avoid the areas that are likely to be damaging. And so this actually means that no hospital in the UK is actually meeting its 62-day wait target for radiotherapy treatment. And so what we're really excited to do is if we can train a machine learning system to mimic and perform well at this exact task, then potentially an AI-assisted radiotherapy planning tool could speed up treatment times very, very significantly. So really, I just want to leave you with the sense that we're trying to build a new kind of organization. We're here to make the world a better place. This is what we're truly motivated by. And we recognize that whilst we've made incredible progress with AI, and that's very exciting, and it will deliver an enormous number of breakthroughs over the coming decades. The truth is that ethical stewardship is actually our collective challenge, and so what we need is for everybody to be involved in holding us accountable, everybody to be involved in engaging with us directly about how these technologies will change our society and change the way we work and the way that we live. And we're very open to that, and that's something we're very motivated by. We actually believe that we need to be as innovative and as speedy with new models of governance as we are with the technologies that we actually develop. So if you're excited by any of that vision or mission, or if you've got ideas, suggestions, comments, or feedback, or you want to come and work with us, please give me an email, mustafa@deepmind.com. Thank you very much.